heard of the 1953 CIA-backed coup that overthrew Iran's democratically elected leader, Mohammad Mosaddegh, the man behind the nationalization of oil and the end of foreign exploitation.
He was overthrown by British and American interest, and as a result of that, the Shah of Iran came in. As a result of that, you had the Iranian Revolution coming in, and that's where we are today.
But the story actually begins 2 years earlier. This is how the US and Britain removed him, triggering a chain of events that would define Iran for decades and reshape its relationship with the United States. It's 1951, and anti-colonial nationalist sentiment is rising as World War II comes to an end. Iranian protesters tear down signs for the British-owned Anglo-Iranian Oil Company and raise the Iranian flag instead.
Tension increases in Tehran. Feature posters crying out with the British, out too with the almost equally unpopular Americans.
This was a declaration of independence. Iran knew this, the British did too, and they were terrified. After 50 years of oil exploitation, Britain's monopoly over Iranian oil was under threat as anger in Iran was reaching a breaking point.
We were not prepared to see, if we could possibly help it, Iran get away with an arbitrary act of nationalization without compensation and be able to sell oil. We wanted to show the world that they couldn't behave in this way.
The anti-colonial movement was led by Prime Minister Mohammad Mosaddegh. Britain and the US would overthrow him 2 years later.
Beneath the stark Persian mountains lies some of the richest oil deposits in the world. British enterprise and money developed the oil fields, piping the crude oil to Abadan, the largest refinery in the world. Cracked down here is an output now exceeding 30 million tons a year. It supplies Britain herself with 1/4 of her oil requirements. Also, Western Europe.
As the Cold War took hold and global powers competed for influence, oil had never been more valuable. In Iran, its oil was controlled by the British-owned AIOC, now known today as BP, in agreement with Iran's then monarch, British-backed Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The country's oil industry developed under the 1901 Darcy Concession. Now, this granted rights to British interests exclusively, including the right to exploration, production, and refining of petroleum for 60 years. Iran, on the other hand, had minimal returns, no royalties, no access to company accounts, and no control over its own resources. So while oil transformed Britain into a global power, most Iranians saw little of the wealth. Now, at this point, the Shah was facing a crisis of authority. He was seen by many as weak, out of touch, and tied to foreign interests, as was Prime Minister Ali Razmara's pro-Western government, and tensions were boiling over. In March 1951, Razmara was assassinated, and pressure to nationalize Iran's oil industry grew. Enter Mossadegh. The secular Democrat became the face of Iran's push for independence. He reduced the powers of the Shah and nationalized Iran's oil industry, ending British control and putting it back into Iranian hands. For Mossadegh and his allies, this was essential. If Iran was going to develop on its own terms, it needed control over its own resources. And for Britain, it was a direct threat to its economic and political power. Still recovering from World War II, it saw Iranian oil as vital. Britain took Iran to court demanding compensation. They imposed a blockade on Iran's oil exports, pushing the country into an economic crisis. Now, Western media portrayed Iranians not as resisting control, but as ungrateful.
Angry protests were delivered against the Supreme Court's findings, which upheld Britain's case against Persian aggravation of the crisis. Many an insult was hurled at Britain by nationalists who forgot the role Britain has played in bringing prosperity to Persia.
But Britain couldn't handle it alone, so it turned to the United States, framing the crisis in Cold War terms, warning that instability could open the door to Soviet influence, and that Mossadegh was vulnerable to this.
One of his rare appearances, Mohammad Mosaddegh, Premier of Iran, meets the press to reaffirm his government's unwillingness to arbitrate with Britain over nationalizing the Anglo-Iranian oil company. With chances of a settlement fading, the West's best hope is that this sickly man, in whose frail hands may lie the key to peace, is as anti-Russian as he is anti-British.
Sickly, frail, notice the words used to describe Mossadegh, not as a nationalist leader, but a problem to be managed. Now, this was the start of a broader narrative, one that portrayed him as eccentric and unfit to lead. Mossadegh was known to give interviews from his bed, often in his pajamas, and this was something Western media seized on to paint him as weak and irrational. And as that narrative took hold, it made what came next easier.
The fact is that we had some involvement with overthrowing a democratically elected regime in Iran.
In July 1953, 2 years after nationalization, CIA officer Kermit Roosevelt Jr., President Roosevelt's grandson, arrives in Tehran with a plan. The United States takes the lead in removing Iran's prime minister. Now, this is known as Operation Ajax. The CIA and Britain's MI6 began building pressure from within by bribing off politicians, buying off newspapers, and planting stories that painted Mossadegh as corrupt, unstable, and dangerously close to the Soviet Union. They worked to turn public opinion against him, and even brought in Princess Ashraf, the Shah's sister, to him to sign royal decrees dismissing Mossadegh. At the same time, the US and the British worked through local intermediaries like the Rashidian brothers to orchestrate unrest on the streets, staging protests, posing as communist supporters, and carrying out false flag attacks on mosques and public figures.
These two agents that I mentioned saw the opportunity and sent the people we had under our control into the streets and acted as if they were Tudeh. They were provocateurs, but we had more than just provocateurs. We had a lot of shock troops who actually acted as if they were Tudeh people throwing rocks at mosques, at priests.
Now, the aim was to create chaos and convince Iranians that Mossadegh's rule would lead to a communist takeover. So distrust in Mossadegh began to grow, especially among conservative and religious groups. Declassified documents suggest the CIA built alliances with influential clerics like Ayatollah Mohammad Mosaddegh and Abu Qasim Ghashani, who was actually once a supporter of Mossadegh. With British and American backing, these networks helped drive anti-Mossadegh unrest. Ghashani would later mentor Ayatollah Khomeini, the same man who went on to overthrow the Shah and establish the Islamic Republic. The plan was simple: remove Mossadegh, restore the Shah, but the first attempt failed. Mossadegh had been tipped off. This failure forced the Shah to flee Rome. Pro-Mossadegh's protesters flooded the streets to stop the coup and bring down the monarchy. But the US didn't give in. CIA-backed networks spread decrees claiming Mossadegh had already been removed from power. 2 days after the failed coup, anti-Mossadegh protests returned. CIA-backed networks, including clerics and the Rashidians, mobilized rent crowds, and key groups in support of Mossadegh stayed off the streets. This time, it worked. On the 19th of August 1953, the coup succeeded. Mossadegh was arrested and later tried for treason.
That mob that came into North Tehran and was decisive in the overthrow was a mercenary mob, had no ideology. And that mob was paid for by American dollars. And the amount of money that was used it has to have been very large.
Power shifted to the Western-backed General Zahedi, the man chosen to replace Mossadegh and expand the powers of the Shah. The same Zahedi who had been arrested by the British for pro-Nazi activities during the Second World War. According to the internal CIA history, the Secret Service arranged to pay $5 million to the new Prime Minister's government.
The thoughts of Britain instinctively turned to Abadan, that monument to British enterprise and engineering skill. Forced to abandon what we had created in the wilderness, is it too much to hope that we shall see once more the tankers of Britain at Abadan? Maybe sanity will yet prevail, and Iran and Britain go forward in harmony.
The 1953 coup showed just how quickly power could be taken away. Over the following decades, the Shah ruled with a deep paranoia. Political opposition was crushed, media censorship was ripe, and a feared security force silenced dissent. Now, at the same time, Iran was rapidly modernizing, with close ties to the West. And for many Iranians, that progress came at a cost: growing inequality, repression, and anger at foreign interference. This all accumulated in 1979. The Iranian Revolution brought millions onto the streets, forcing the Shah to flee and ending decades of Western-backed rule. Led by Ruhollah Khomeini, who had returned to Iran after a 14-year exile, a new Islamic republic emerged, one shaped by a rejection of Western intervention. Now, for many Iranians, the events of 1979 were a direct response to 1953, and just months later, that anger turned directly towards the United States. In November 1979, after the US admitted the Shah for cancer treatment, Iranian students stormed the US embassy in Tehran, taking dozens of American diplomats hostage in what became the Iran hostage crisis. Washington cut off diplomatic ties and imposed sanctions on the country, and Iranian distrust of the West continued. For many of those involved, the takeover was driven by one fear: that the United States might try to overthrow Iran's government again, just as it had done in 1953.
States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil.
And that's why the United States will do what we must to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong,